So I guess I shouldn't be too harsh on this game's PC management system, because the last time I complained about it, I got a comment informing me that there's actually a very good reason for why it is that bad. At least the Pokemon storage system, and I assume the item system as well. There's actually a very good reason for why it is that bad. Game Boy hardware limitations. It's limited RAM, to be specific. When it comes to Pokemon boxes, only one box is actually loaded into memory at any specific time, and the other ones only exist in your save data. So that's why you need to save every time you change boxes. And that's also why you can't catch a Pokemon and then have it delivered to a different box, because in order to do that, it would have to ask you to save in the middle of a battle, and obviously you're not gonna want that because people are gonna use that to cheat. So yeah, here's another thing that's annoying. And yeah, I know, I get it, I said I wouldn't be too harsh about it, and now I understand why it is that way, but that doesn't change the fact that it is still annoying, and I'm still gonna complain about it. So every time I select an item here and deposit it, the cursor goes way back up to the top. And I have to search back to where I was and scroll back down. It's a minor annoyance, sure, but there's tons of minor annoyances and they add up. So yeah, about the catching Pokemon and it not going into the box, it would have at least been nice if they did something like in Generation 2 where you get asked once you have a box full if you want to change it. No, don't deposit the ticket, I still need that to get back on the ship. Although even in Generation 2, that's still kind of bullshit that you have to get someone's phone number to get them to call you to tell you that your box is full and that you should change it, rather than it just immediately popping up without having to waste a fucking phone number slot for it. Because that's bullshit about Generation 2 as well, that you can only have 10 phone numbers registered, but yeah. And also, you first have to get to that point in the game where you can even do that, where you can even get that guy's phone number. And even then, there's a chance you might miss it, so yeah. They still could have handled it a lot better, even in Generation 2. Nope, that was the wrong door. It's this one where I left off. And that item that we tried to get was the Body Slam TM, which I'm going to give to Fushigiso. It's more literally translated as something like Lean On. It's a normal type move with 85 power and 100% accuracy, with an added effect of a 30% chance of paralyzing. Although in this generation it can't paralyze normal type Pokemon. In later generations it can. Now some of you might be wondering if this guy speaks with a French accent in the Japanese version as well. And the answer is actually yes, he does. Although the people in the kitchen that I'm about to go to don't, although they do in the English version. And that guy I just talked to, I remember in the German version, they gave him like a North German accent that's stereotypically associated with sailors. He's like, Moin Moin du Landrade. So something I forgot to mention about Pokédollars in the last episode is that that currency is actually used in the Japanese version of Colosseum and XD. And that's the kind of shit that pisses me off way more than all this localization business itself. It's when these localization changes become retconned into the Japanese version. It's like, instead of improving the localization in later installments, you instead retcon the Japanese version to be more closer to what a bunch of hacked idiots in fucking Nintendo of America came up with. Some ass-backwards bullshit. It's the same thing as with... You know how the Japanese Pokemon logos have always been awesome and the English ones have always replaced them with the same generic, boring logo over and over again? Well, now, in Sword and Shield, the Japanese logo looks like that too. Except now, there's been a Sword and Shield beta version leaked, and look at what the logo in the beta looked like. They had it right, and then they fucked it up. And there are so many cases of this, like, reverse localization shit just within the Pokemon franchise alone. And don't get me started on the anime. That shit's been so fucking watered down over the years, ever since fucking 4Kids started dubbing it in English. Then Japan was like, no, we gotta make it acceptable so that the 4Kids won't censor it. Except 4Kids will still fucking censor it no matter what you do, because it's 4Kids and they will always find something to edit. Even when there is absolutely nothing, they'll just make something up. Like, they literally invented those, like, that fake language that you see in fucking the anime and the video games nowadays, specifically so that 4Kids wouldn't edit out the text, and they still edited out the fake language that they specifically made up for them to not edit out. I swear, in the advanced generation anime, this shit got so bad that this is an actual scene from the Japanese version, completely untouched by 4Kids. Or you know how they made James a lot more explicitly gay in the dub? And now you have people thinking 4Kids was like LGBT friendly. Like, I swear 4Kids was actually woke, guys. Except what people don't know is that behind the scenes, they would contact the Japanese creators and ask them to stop having him cross-dress. And you'll actually notice this, that around the time like Generation 2 starts, he cross-dresses a lot less. And whenever he does, the Japanese creators always had to justify it to 4Kids by saying like, oh, he's dressing up as this specific character and that's why he's dressing up as a woman. But yeah, 4Kids was definitely not progressive. The only way they were ever okay with having a gay character in their shows is if they could use it to make a bunch of jokes about taking the boss's back entrance and shit like that. And speaking of innuendos, this guy right here says, I like feisty kids like you. That's one of the more famous or infamous lines in the game, in the English version. It's actually pretty accurately translated. I don't think there's really any innuendo intended here. I think people just look way too deep into this. I think it may just be a case of Westerners actively looking for things in Japanese media to interpret as pedophilic so they can complain about it. I mean, just look at Twitter. So, something else. I talked about that truck in the last episode. There was something else that I wanted to talk about regarding that truck that I didn't get to in the last episode. Why the hell did they put that truck there in the first place when there's pretty much no way anyone would ever access it, aside from... Well, I did mention that one way that they might have intended, but maybe not. I don't think they actually thought that far. But yeah, to get to the bottom of the truck mystery, I think we're gonna have to dig a little deeper into the game's development history. There's an early piece of concept art that's been floating around the internet for quite a while now. That's a bit of the map of Kanto, but there's like an additional city that doesn't seem to be connected to anything. And for the longest time, people were left wondering what that is. But in the recent leaks, there has been some information that may indicate that that place might be connected to that truck somehow. Because in those leaks, there's an early beta map that appears to be what that missing place on that map was meant to be. And guess what's right in the middle of that map? Yep, it's the truck. This place isn't connected to anywhere else on the map and it's right in the water, so it may have been intended as sort of a port town. So what my theory is that originally in development, you were going to actually board the Saint Anne and ride the ship all the way to that place. And then presumably the truck would have played some kind of significant role. I assume it would be significant because that is the only instance of that truck sprite on the entire map, while pretty much the entire rest of the map is nothing but the same couple of sprites repeated over and over again, and those are all like early placeholder alpha sprites that aren't in the final game anymore at all, and that truck is the only thing from those maps that hasn't changed its visual appearance. So what I'm thinking is that when they decided to cut that entire story arc out, they decided that since the Saint Anne would have been the place where the ship that you would use to go to that place, that's where they decided to hide that little sprite as like a little Easter egg or like a kind of inside joke among the developers or something like that. Of course, this is all just speculation, take this with a grain of salt. I could be completely wrong, but that's just my personal theory. The fact is that Truck is in a prototype map that we got from the leaks a while ago. By the way, speaking of the leaks, one of my favorite little tidbits that came out of that is, you know how in this game there's a lot of promotion for like Game Boy and Super Famicom? How there's all these like little consoles hidden in the game, or not even hidden, but like blatant advertising pretty much. Well, in the leaks there's some sprite sheets where you can actually see some guys playing Virtual Boys. Gee, I wonder why they took those out. I was talking about the dowsing machine in the last episode. I should have mentioned that in Fire Red and Leaf Green there were a few more items that were added that you could only find with the dowsing machine. Even if you know where they are, you won't be able to get them unless you are using the dowsing machine. Now this guy just mentioned jellyfish. Yes, jellyfish, the actual real-life species of jellyfish, not Menukurage or Dokukurage. It's one of those cases of early installment weirdness where they mention real-life animal species existing in the Pokemon universe. There are a few cases like that in the early anime as well. Of course, later generations, they kind of did away with that because it kind of doesn't make any sense, because, like, what's actually the difference between an animal and a Pokemon if we assume that they both live in the same universe? Like, what is there something in a Pokemon's DNA that makes it possible to catch it in a ball that animals don't have? But if we assume that animals don't exist in this world, that doesn't really make any sense either, because if you look at like the bestiary entries, it's always like Menukurage, the jellyfish Pokemon. But like, why are they classified as the jellyfish Pokemon if jellyfish don't exist in this world? And oh my god, I am overthinking a children's video game again, aren't I? So Fushigiso has now reached level 30 and is going to learn Leaf Cutter, or Razor Leaf as it's known in the English version. I'm gonna, of course, replace its weaker counterpart, Vine Whip. And last time I was talking about the various in-game sprite differences between the different versions of Generation 1. But most people don't know that even the overworld graphics have been overhauled between... That was the sound of my annoying cats beating the shit out of each other. I swear I'm not a real-life Pokemon trainer, they just do that on their own. So yeah, a lot of the overworld assets have been changed between red and green and blue, and then again from blue to yellow. And once again, the international red version also uses the blue tile set. But they weren't exactly consistent about it. There are still a few places in the game where the red and green tiles still show up in the later versions, and I'm pointing this out specifically here because this area of the St. Anne that I'm on right now is one of the few places in the game, along with the Safari Zone, where you can still see the red and green water tiles in the other versions of the game. Of course, I'm talking about it while there's a battle going on, but in a moment you're gonna see what I mean. I guess maybe they didn't change it here because they didn't want to redo the whole animation when the ship leaves. But with the Safari Zone, I really don't know. So there you can see what the water looks like. It looks the same in all the other versions, but in most other places of the game, it looks like this in blue and international red, and like this in yellow. And I gotta say, trying to find a comprehensive overview of all the changes that were made to the overworld graphics between the versions is harder than it should be, because most people don't know any of this ever happened. So when you like Google Pokemon Red, Green, Blue, Yellow sprite comparisons or whatever, 99% of what you find is just the Pokemon front sprites. So to save you guys the trouble, here is a complete overview of all the changes made between different versions, including even prototype versions that was made by Helix Chamber. Note that they list different tile sets between Japanese blue versus American or international red and blue, as well as Japanese yellow versus international yellow. That only is referring to the texts on stuff like the gyms and marts and Pokemon Center signs. Don't bother going to look for subtle differences there. Now, what just happened there? We saw it happen a bunch of times earlier in the episode, and I'm sure it happened a lot of times throughout the LP, and I just never mentioned it. Is I used a grass type move against a Menukurage, which is water poison. Now, grass is super effective against water, but not very effective against poison, so that should end up as a neutral hit, right? But the message that I got when I used that attack said it's not very effective. That's a glitch in Generation 1. Now, don't worry, it still does neutral damage, it's only the message that's glitched. That's what happens in Generation 1 when you use an attack that's effective against one type of the opponent, but not very effective against the other. Now, a lot of people seem to think that whether it defaults to super effective or not very effective as the message shown depends on what's type 1 and what's type 2 of the opponent, but that's not actually true. The actual reason that it determines which of the two messages to show is actually the order that the types or the type effectivenesses are programmed into the game's code. So basically it goes through a list, basically like if player type grass and enemy type poison, then not very effective, but then it never checks past that to see the next if player type grass and enemy type water then is not very effective. It is super effective. It never sees that part because it stops checking after the first one. So the fact that such an obvious bug in one of the game's core mechanics made it into the final game supports the theory that the whole concept of dual types was added pretty late in development. That would also explain why the type chart is so fucking broken in this generation. And also, if we look at that order again that I just mentioned about how the types are programmed into the game, you'll notice that it seems like the dragon type was also a last minute addition, which checks out because there's only one dragon type family and only one offensive dragon type move that ignores the type chart. And this would also explain why Pokemon like Gyarados and Lizardon aren't part dragon type, because the dragon type was a last minute addition. Everything about this theory seems to check out, is even the fact that the Pokemon's designs, none of them really look like they were designed to be dual type to begin with. It all just seems like they slapped another type on at the end, and again with the weird fucking music glitch after the battle. I've never had that happen that often in a playthrough, I think. It's been 3 times now in this playthrough. Oh, and while I'm at it, the flying type was probably a pretty late addition as well, because there is a leftover bird type that was probably some kind of like a beta version of the flying type that they ended up not using and using flying type instead. And that would also explain why Pokemon like Popo are normal flying instead of flying normal. There's also Psyhorn, which is ground rock, while all the others are rock ground. And it's just these tiny little inconsistencies that they may have kind of rushed the whole dual typing mechanic a little bit. But anyway, I think I'm gonna end this episode here, and next time we're gonna fight Khan again.